This is the last lecture of the semester. I hope under the circumstances, as best as you would have enjoyed it. I wish I could teach you this course in the classroom. It's a very interesting course, and I understand it loses all its interest when I'm talking to you like a monologue. It cannot be turned into a dialogue, which I love. Having your faces and your queries, your expressions right before me, and then try to understand how to explain things. So now today we talk about the last thing of this course is the authority. And the authority, what Abraham really calls them gods on earth. And you can guess it who they were. The Brahmins. They dominated the society, but much later. It's a late development in the nearly 5 millennia long history of India. Brahmins did not exist as a hereditary varna in the Rig Vedic times, and though a nascent varna system had developed during the later Vedic period, Brahmins could hardly thrive in the turbulent and evolving socio-cultural environment of the age of Upanishads and Buddha. The succeeding period too was not favorable to the ascendancy of Brahmins, for it was Buddhism that dominated the land for many centuries during this period, from around the 3rd century BCE to around the middle of the 1st millennium CE. All this changed by the middle of the 1st millennium CE. Brahman then ascended to a commanding position in society and remained unchallenged there until the 20th century. Such a long period of command. They now enjoy social dominance, but by their ingenuity, skill, discipline, and hard work, having adapted themselves adroitly to the changed socio-cultural environments of modern India. Brahmins are indeed the most enduringly successful community in the history of mankind. Brahmins began their slow ascent to the summit of society in the early centuries of the Common Era. What enabled them to attain this goal was a combination of favorable historical developments and their own prudent, tenacious efforts to take advantage of the opportunities that these developments presented. The most important of the historical development that favored the rise of Brahmins was the collapse of commercial economy. You will always see in the history of the world that whenever the economy has weakened, the people who took the lead in commanding the religion have been more successful. Brahmins had generally shunned towns and which were the strongholds of a radical religion and non-Brahmin varnas. But as towns turned derelict in Indian society and culture became rustic and insular, Brahmins came into their own. The low cultural level of the rural folk and their helplessness against the unpredictable and uncontrollable forces of nature enabled Brahmins to seize their psyche and recast it in a form that served Brahminical class interests. It's always the depraved and deprived and the people who don't know, the unknown ones, who get into this grip. Brahmins have always been, even at the height of Buddhism popularity, well entrenched in rural India, where they catered to the ritual needs of the common people. But the political fragmentation of India in the post-Gupta period also favored the rise of Brahmins, as the numerous petty rajas, many of them of tribal or low varna origin, and several of them aliens who now appeared on the political arena, needed the backing of Brahmins to legitimize their rule and endow them Kshatriya status. Sounds familiar? And the rulers in turn rewarded Brahmins for their services by deferring to them socially and endowing them with extensive land grants. By 2nd century CE, Brahmins were on the move, land grants by kings and chieftains, and Brahmins began to appear at this time. Presently, Brahmins established themselves as the whole arbiters in law and social institutions. Their theory of caste had been admitted, and their own caste was accorded an unquestioned supremacy. The primary source of Brahminical power was their knowledge of the scriptures, which in the late classical period they kept as profound mysteries accessible only to them. The term Brahmin means who has sacred knowledge and is derived from the neuter term Brahman, meaning literally the swelling of spirit and by extension sacred word or spiritual knowledge. The monopolization of scriptural knowledge by Brahmins was facilitated by the fact that by the classical age, the language of the Vedas had become archaic and obscure, which only Brahmin savants could understand. Brahmins claimed that they alone knew the working of the universe and the divinely ordained laws that should govern the lives of all men. The Hindus' law books were all composed by Brahmins, but the laws themselves were claimed to be divinely ordained, known as Manu Simriti. The unique and austere lifestyle of Brahmins and the mysterious rituals they performed enveloped them with an aura of occult mystique. It would be fatal to provoke a Brahman, Manu warns, for though he is forbidden to bear arms, his speech indeed is the weapon of the Brahman and is more potent than all other weapons. So violence against Brahmans was considered an irredeemable sin. Even hating a Brahman was a grave sin too. Incredible, though the Brahminical claims about their origin and lineage were, there was no one to question them in the credulous age. And the another factor was, that crucial factor, that enabled Brahmins to consolidate their position at the top of the society was the symbiotic relationship what they developed with kings. Brahmins and Kshatriyas, by their mutual support, could elevate each other and burn down the enemies as fire and wind burns down the woods. This is stated in Mahabharata. Brahmins thus gained status, wealth and power by various means, but they were canny enough not to jeopardize their gains by entering into any competitive activities. Brahmins therefore did not overtly clash with the material interest of other communities. But not all Brahmins jatis enjoy equally high social status. The Brahmins who perform funeral rites are generally looked down upon everywhere. Similarly, the Vatima Brahmins of Tamil Nadu and the Tapudhan Brahmins of Gujarat have a low social status. Later, however, as the caste system ossified, it became extremely difficult for outsiders to enter the Brahman Varna. A peculiarity of the Brahman Varna is that apart from being divided into jatis, it is also divided into agnate lineage groups called Gotras. Law books enjoin the Brahmins to be particularly careful in choosing his occupation. He should seek a mean of subsistence which either causes no pain or at least little pain to others. Law books are not consistent with each other in these proscriptions, and even individual texts are riddled with contradictions. Law books generally permit Brahmins to take up forbidden occupations if they are unable to make a living out of their prescribed occupation. Manu justifies this by arguing that it is no sin for a man to do whatever is necessary to sustain his life. The primary and most respected traditional occupation of Brahmins was studying and teaching the scriptures. But not everyone had the ability or aptitude for this. Buddhist texts describe Brahmins as engaged in farming, cattle rearing trade, carpentry, basket weaving, pottery, and so on, and serving as physicians, augurs, cooks, florists, policemen, wagon drivers, storytellers, and soldiers. Some even worked as menials, hunters, and snake charmers. Sometimes Brahmins generally excelled in whichever professionally they entered, but sometimes because of their discipline and hard work, So even though law books generally considered it improper for Brahmins to bear arms, a Brahmin shall not take a weapon in his hand, even if it intends only to examine it. But later, they even fought in the wars. A Brahmin on his birth automatically takes his position as the head of the society. All others, regardless of their age, wealth and power, have to defer to him. He is never the servant, but always the master, even when he serves under someone else. Interestingly, Brahmins also enjoyed several privileges, and they lived off society opulently without any economically productive labor of their own, and did this without any feeling of guilt or shame. All men had to toil for their livelihood, but Brahman received it as a homage. The law books ordained that it was a fundamental obligation of kings to ensure the well-being of Brahmins. To prevent the awful calamity of causing hardship to Brahmins, lawgivers made it a strict duty for everyone to give gifts to Brahmins, and only to Brahmins, for only they were entitled to receive gifts. All others could only give gifts, never receive them. Law books further asserted that those who give gifts to Brahmins would go to heaven, while those who did not give gifts would go to hell. Brahmins should never be refused what they ask for, the law books warn. Gifts given to Brahmins were not alms in common sense of the word. They were entitlement of the receiver and obligation of the giver. Yet, for all their emphasis on the obligation of everyone to give gifts to Brahmins, the lawgivers were careful to warn Brahmins not to antagonize donors or their families by making avaricious and self-defeating demands. The gift most valued by Brahmins were the land grants given by kings. Kings gave land grants to Brahmins as a pious deed to gain religious merit and temporal benefits for themselves and to avert natural disasters in the kingdom. Brahmins were generally exempted from all taxes. They could take anything, but they don't have to give anything back. The religious merit that they bought or brought to a kingdom just by living there was adequate contribution by them to the state. Brahmins had the right to share in all the treasure troves found anywhere in the kingdom. Brahmins also had the free use of all public facilities and did not have to pay toll or ferries. What a chosen people. Rulers usually acceded to these demands, for they considered it a pious and prestigious act to confer benefits on Brahmins. Brahmins were entitled to 18 immunities according to texts, and they considered themselves exempt from many of the laws of the state. And according to Manu, kings must always defer to Brahmins, for Brahmins were the lords of the whole world, while kings were, after all, only the lords of just some small tracts of lands. It appears that Brahmins were in a position to manipulate royal prescript to their advantage, as they usually occupied crucial advisory and administrative positions in kingdom. In this discriminatory legal system of classical India, in which crime and punishment were graded according to Varna, Brahmins enjoyed exceptional privilege. However, Brahmins could not be tortured or made to suffer any corporal punishment, certainly not executed, whatever their crimes. So the Brahminical claims of immunities were usually conceded by kings. The king and Brahmin composition is good. Thus, a Chola inscription of around the 10th century concerning a village dedicated to a temple and presumably occupied by Brahmins states that if a crime or sin becomes public, God alone shall punish the village. The thinking that were all Brahmins enjoying all this, or not many Brahmins would have lived up to all exacting prescriptions in the law books. But of course there were Brahmins and Brahmins. The priestly class in India was far more numerous than any other civilization. Brahmins are simultaneously the heroes and villains of Indian civilization. On the positive side, the credit for shaping the classical Indian civilization goes largely to Brahmins or to men of Brahmin ancestry. It was they who dreamed up India's gods and goddesses and fitted them up with fabulous myths, structured Indian society, and gave Indians the rule by which they were to live. But equally, Brahmins were responsible for much of that was noxious in Indian civilization, particularly for keeping vast sections of society, even their own women, confined in a closed, musty, lightless world, denying them access to education or to any other means of self-fulfillment or social advancement. Brahman held that everything that could be known or was worth knowing was already known and was only known to them. So nothing but perfect. Thank you so very much. Khuda Hafiz.